we can't really, as with every conversation I'm having, it seems like in the last 9 months, we can't really have any conversation without the backdrop of the pandemic. And like I said, I wanted to be quite clear that the arguments for the blended workforce are very clear prior to. But I would anticipate that, as I said, just from a capacity point of view, with there suddenly being this upswell of kind of where there was lost capacity through lockdowns, I would imagine that there's an appetite more towards the pandemic. But I suppose another factor in that would be potentially, at the moment, still, we're still coming towards the end of 2020. It could be that engineering that's covering a certain location, certain geographical range, suddenly is taken out of the workforce for a couple of weeks, where they may certainly here in London, if you're tested and you have a positive test for COVID, you're isolated for 2 weeks, which is have a massive challenge for capacity planning. Frank, just how big has the impact of the pandemic been in terms of kind of raising the need for companies to adopt a blended workforce approach, to be more agile, to be more flexible with their workforce?
Yeah, it's been significant, and it's really twofold. And you alluded to one of the reasons, or actually both of the reasons, right? The first one is that everyone has had engineers and technicians impacted by COVID, because they are frontline workers, and although all of them were locked down, let's say for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the pandemic back in March or April, by about the beginning of April, right, they were deemed essential workers, and they needed to get back to work. But there was a combination of fewer resources available because some of them were sick, and secondly, there was a surge in demand because we serve consumer-facing industries, right? And the fact that you have 120 million households in the U.S., 25 or 30 million households in the UK, and another 100 million or more households in Europe locked down, and homes have become schools, offices, gyms. So the equipment in the homes are getting increased utilization, and therefore we've seen a surge in demand, because if you're running your dishwasher 2 or 3 times a day instead of once every other day, and you're cooking every meal at home, and you've got your washer and your dryer running because all of a sudden you've got all of your family back at home, including what used to be empty nester children, it's created this perfect storm. And so the irony is that one person's meat is another's poison, and this pandemic has been extremely beneficial to our business because we've seen a surge in demand, and we've seen a tremendous increase in digitizing the service experience to make it better for consumers and to reduce costs of service delivery. So we've pretty much seen across all of our key verticals, which include manufacturers of appliance and consumer electronics, heating, cooling, and ventilation systems. So companies like Ideal Boilers, as Samir mentioned, BDR Thermea, and the like. Property and casualty insurers. In North America, we had the most active hurricane season on record, right? And when you have destruction of property, you have an increased demand to get adjusters out there to inspect the property, to be able to process claims and reimburse homeowners for their losses, and allow them to repair their homes. And so we've seen this incredible demand, and that's really fueled the need for using more contingent labor to be able to address the demand.
Again, what a year 2020 is. I completely, maybe it's because I'm that wee bit more distant, but you forget about the impact of the hurricanes and everything else that's hit the States as well, and of course these all have additional impacts. It's interesting, you mentioned a couple of different industries there, Obviously, the loss adjusting sector, the insurance sector there, you know, something that I'm quite close to myself, having worked in insurance for a long time. But also a lot of consumer facing goods. We talked about people's homes. I could certainly testify that my first thought, it took me about 2 days before of homeschooling before I realized that primary school teachers are the most underpaid people on the planet. I would gladly have paid £1 million for somebody to take the education back from me. But you know, one of the things that I really see is there seems to be a certain sectors that this is a very appropriate approach for. I think perhaps, you know, heavy manufacturing, you want your guys there, whereas, you know, consumer electronics or, you know, various heating, perfect example, HVAC sector. Samir, have I got that right? Because I do think it's important to kind of define the parameters here. And for me, it seems like quite consumer-facing industries are most suited to the blended workforce approach.
Yeah, no, you're right, Kris. We find that you know, in almost all consumer industries, like Frank's pointed out, major appliances, consumer electronics, you know, home warranty systems, home security, you know, property and casualty insurance, again, both auto and property, retail, right? You know, all these industries that are being touched by consumers or involve potentially sending people to the consumer's house are ideal for a blended workforce because of the issue I brought up earlier. The coverage issue is enormous. It is impossible to cover every home or office in a country or state with an employed technician or an insurance adjuster. And you need to have this third-party network of companies. You know, another point I wanted to make in the definitions is almost every customer of ours also has a distinction between in their third-party or contingent workforce. So they have a set of service providers who they call you know, their preferred ISPs, their preferred service providers, right? Or their premier service providers, where they will go to, they will send a lot of the work as a first choice, right? Because they do business primarily with them, with their brand, right? And then if they can't find one of those, then they'll go to everyone else, right?
That's a pool.
And if segments even within the third-party network, you want to be one of the preferred providers if you're providing service. But anyway, back to your question, yeah, it's all the consumer-facing industries, because wherever consumers are involved, you need coverage, and it doesn't matter a consumer in a rural area, you know, who's bought an Electrolux dishwasher doesn't care that where they're headquartered or where the appliance is manufactured, because they bought it, they expect service, right?
Yeah.
And especially in warranty service is critical because the OEM is on the hook to provide in warranty service, during the warranty period. So in those cases, they have to have coverage, right? If they're doing business in that region, and a contingent workforce or a third-party workforce is imperative.
So I would assume then, within certain sectors, you mentioned Electrolux, great example, fantastic organization. We've done quite a lot of work covering their approach to service in the past here at Field Service News. And Steve, who is joining us for the documentary, is actually, a member of our FSN 20 as an acknowledgement of that. That's our collection of, the most innovative and forward-thinking service leaders in the industry. But there's a number of different other white good manufacturers, and I would imagine such an approach is fairly prevalent amongst them. Frank, would you say that that's the case within these kind of sectors that we're discussing? Is it as commonplace as I might imagine from this conversation, or is it still something that only a certain group of organizations have embraced?
No, you're absolutely correct, especially across the white and brown goods manufacturers. The use of blended workforce is fairly prevalent now. As Samir mentioned earlier, the ratio will vary, but
Yeah.
across our customer base, and we are pretty dominant in the white goods and brown goods markets, especially in North America. I would say that, you know, our customers, somewhere between 20 and 100% of their service volume is performed by third-party workforces, right? And, you know, it really depends on the OEM. And so, you know, in the white goods, you know, it probably ranges somewhere between, you know, 20 and 30% go to a third-party workforce. In, let's say, the product warranty space or the warranty administration markets, you tend to see almost 100% utilization of contingent workforces, right? Because, you know, those manufacturers are providing product warranties for a variety of different, you know, OEM manufacturers, and so they really do have to go with a third party that that can service, you know, a variety of different brands. And, you know, really what we see as you know, some of the key impediments are not so much regulatory, because, you know, at least in the industries that we play in, the devices are not incredibly complex, right? They're not, you know, we're not sending an engineer to fix an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, right? Which, you know, would probably require a very specialized engineer. You know, the items that are being fixed are fairly, you know, simpler items. And so, you know, there's less regulation involved, although at least here in the United States, brands want to ensure that the third-party engineers that are being sent into someone's home don't have a criminal record, you know, aren't abusing drugs, and so, you know, there are certifications and background checks and drug testing that are part of the entire servicer onboarding process, and we provide solutions within our platform to automate that. So really, you know, what we're seeing is that, you know, the bigger impediment is really that it requires dedicated resources within a company to recruit, train, certify, and manage a third-party workforce. And that, to me, seems to be the you know, the bigger impediment to it, you know, gaining even more traction than it has.